Substantiate, to establish by proof or competent evidence. Welcome back to another episode of the Substantiate podcast, where usually each week I discuss a new hypothetical matchup with a guest, but this week I thought that instead of talking about a hypothetical matchup like normal, I'm gonna kind of do a deep dive into the entire Lakers season, as they just won the NBA Finals on Sunday night. So again, this week I am unfortunately not joined by a guest. In today's episode, I'm gonna sort of break down the Lakers season into three sections, and the first is going to be a brief timeline of the Lakers team and how it came to be this year. And then I will talk about the style of play that Coach Frank Vogel has set up for this team and how it's different from a lot of other teams in the current NBA. And then lastly, we'll talk about why this team is so special. But before we begin, make sure to follow us at substantiatepod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Make sure to share this podcast with your friends. And you can check out our website on www.substantiatepod.com. So, starting it off with a short timeline of the Lakers season. So, I'm going to start way back in July of 2018 when LeBron signed with the Lakers. It was a several million-dollar contract. I believe it was 4 years and somewhere in the $100 millions. And then in 2019, his first season on the Lakers, they finish at 37-45. So that's when people started to question if LeBron was still good, even though he only played 55 games. So LeBron had his streak of going to like 9 straight NBA Finals, and he broke that in the 2018-19 season. And so that's why people started questioning him. Had he peaked? But was he actually just straight up not good anymore? And so then, after that season, the Lakers did not make the playoffs. And so then we come into 2019 to 2020 season. But before that, in June of 2019, over the summer, the Lakers trade Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 first-round picks, all for Anthony Davis. Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart, they were all Lakers prospects. They were all young. None of them had performed particularly well in the 2018-19 season, but nonetheless, it was a little bit of a shock to see those young, potentially future stars go. And obviously, the Lakers got Anthony Davis, but Brandon Ingram, I believe, was the NBA Most Improved Player of the Year, right? So it was a good trade on both ends, and especially because New Orleans got Zion Williamson. With this trade for New Orleans, they really built a team around Zion. So Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram and Josh Hart, all of them, they have a decent chemistry with Zion, and although Zion missed the beginning portion of this season, by the time he was playing in the regular season, they had a groove that was tough to beat. But then on the other end of that trade for the Lakers, Anthony Davis comes in, and obviously they just won the championship on Sunday night. When he first came to the Lakers, obviously people were happy, a little bit confused that the Lakers would trade these players away. But over the offseason, they also bring in Avery Bradley, who's a shooting guard, although he decided not to play in the NBA bubble in July, August, September, and October. He still performed exceptionally well in the regular season and was definitely a large factor to why the Lakers made it as far as they did. So then they also signed Danny Green, another shooting guard. Obviously, people right now will only say about him how in Game 5 he missed the 3 with like 8 seconds left in the fourth quarter to lose the game for them. I mean, if he made that shot, it would have been over in 5. But instead, he misses that shot, and it goes to Game 6, which I'll get into more later. But Danny Green is another good defensive player, which really fits in with the rest of the Lakers. And so, okay, he missed a 3. Like, get over it. He's an older shooter, granted. LeBron is also adapted to the style of the game. He's learned how to shoot deep threes as the game required it from him. But Danny Green, again, an older veteran in the league. And so if you're looking for a bright and up-and-coming three-point shooter, Danny Green has experience. He's somewhat consistent, but throughout the bubble, especially at the beginning, he was not that consistent. But definitely a big factor on this team that he's a veteran, really replacing some of those young guys that they traded away. So then they also re-signed Rajon Rondo, a point guard, and he played with AD in New Orleans for, I believe it was just 1 year. The Lakers also re-signed JaVale McGee, who was his second year on the Lakers. Before that, he spent a few years in Golden State. He won 2 championships with them. Definitely picked up some experience, but was by no means one of their starters. And JaVale McGee is a center. So then they also signed DeMarcus Cousins, who definitely passed his prime. He hasn't made an all-star team in quite a while. Another player, he was on the Warriors, and he winds up being dropped in February to make room for Markieff Morris, who in the bubble had some very good games and came out to be a decent shooter and mostly reliable. So then we come down to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, KCP, another shooting guard, very similar to Bradley, a little less experience. In the regular season, he did not start. Avery Bradley had the starting role. But in the bubble, KCP was one of the main starters, along with Danny Green, LeBron, and AD. And then that 5th spot kind of changed sometimes. Sometimes it was Alex Caruso, sometimes it was JaVale McGee, sometimes it was Dwight Howard, who is another guy they brought in his first season with the Lakers. And he's another big center, past his prime, but still very big and physical. And especially when it came to the playoffs this year, they really relied on Dwight to kind of get the other team mad at the Lakers, to kind of make them play aggressive, but also sloppy, to give them another thing to think about, which just makes the game more complicated for the other teams. Then the Lakers bring in Quinn Cook, a point guard, also played on Golden State for a little while. The Lakers brought in a few guys that were on Golden State, but he's a point guard. He got some experience there. He didn't get too much playing time. Obviously, the Warriors, they won 3 championships out of 5 years, and in those 5 years, they were in the finals every year, so 5 consecutive Western Conference champions. But then, last but not least, they bring in Jared Dudley, a power forward. They really didn't need to bring him in. Jared Dudley is, again, another veteran, way past his prime, but he would come in sometimes at the end of games, and overall, he wasn't that important. It's not like he contributed in a bad way, it's just he didn't get enough playing time to be a big factor in this team. Alright, so now we're finally moving on to the beginning of the season, and so in the first 20 games, the Lakers are 17-3. Their losses to the LA Clippers, Toronto Raptors, and Dallas Mavericks. So the Clippers were a team that the Lakers struggled with all season. And eventually the Clippers were beat in the Western Conference semifinals by the Denver Nuggets, which was a shock to most. But at the end of the day, the Lakers didn't have to face them in the playoffs, and that may have been potentially the Lakers' most challenging opponent. So then there's the Raptors they lost to. The Raptors, fresh off of a championship season. Danny Green was on the Raptors in the 2018-19 season. But the Raptors also lost Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers. And the Raptors, though, with Kyle Lowry and everyone else on the team, they have a lot of teamwork, and they really pick each other up and carry each other. And when they lost in the playoffs, it was because they stopped playing like a team a little bit. They got a little too reliant on some players, and eventually the players that didn't play as well cost them their season. And then they beat Miami here on November 8th, 95-80. Very low-scoring game. But that just shows that although Miami wasn't the same team in terms of like how great their players are, Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, they still were the Miami Heat. They were still fairly hot at the beginning of the season, and that was just one of the big wins for the Lakers at the beginning of the season when they didn't have that challenging of schedule at the beginning of the season except for the Clippers, Raptors, and I guess you could say the Mavericks also, who they lost to. And now people were starting to question them because of that. They lost 2 big games and 1 smaller game. So then the Mavericks, obviously with Luka Doncic, he was one of the biggest names in the NBA for a while in the bubble. And in Luka Doncic, he just really carried that team with Kristaps Porzingis, and the Lakers lost to them, and there's really not much of an excuse for that game. You lose sometimes. So then the second set of 20 games 21-40, the Lakers lose another 4 games, and they lost them to Indiana Pacers, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Denver Nuggets, and again, the LA Clippers. So Indiana, they really, again, just like the Mavericks, some star players, but no superstars. And just like the Mavericks, although now you could argue that Luka Doncic may become a superstar, but not yet. In Indiana, it's just another inexcusable loss that just happens sometimes. So now you lose to Milwaukee and the Bucks, who were another great team this year. Consistently over the last few years, they've been good regular season teams, but have just choked in the postseason. And then there's the Denver Nuggets that, again, we saw the Lakers play them in the playoffs. Now, this game, Denver they beat the Lakers. And, unlike the inexcusable losses to Dallas and to the Pacers, the Nuggets were still proving themselves in this league. And that was one win for Denver. That was one of their bigger wins at the beginning of the season. And then there's the Clippers again. Now, this was not looking too good for the Lakers. They'd lost to the Clippers twice already. The Clippers adding on Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And when you show up to a team for the first time, it's oftentimes takes maybe a year or two to get used to it, right? And then there's the Lakers, who Anthony Davis just comes on in. All the other people they signed just come on in and win a championship. But for the Clippers, I wouldn't be surprised if they're another title contender next year, if they're in the finals, or if they're in the Western Conference Finals again, playing the Lakers. But eventually, at the end of the season, when it comes down to it, with they're playing Denver in the Western Conference semifinals, they just weren't ready for that as a team yet. And in the regular season, again, talent wins in the regular season. But you need an extra level of superstardom in the postseason that LeBron has, that Anthony Davis is starting to show. But that Kawhi this year, for some reason, maybe it was because he was just in a new place, he didn't show that the same way he did the previous year in Toronto. So then we're looking at games 41 to 60. The Lakers' record at the end of this stretch is 47 and 13. They lose to Orlando, Boston, Philly, Portland, and Houston. The loss to Orlando was, again, another inexcusable loss. They should not have lost that game. And then the loss to Boston. Boston was another good team this year with Jason Tatum. In that game against Boston, LeBron had 5 field goals. Anthony Davis only had 3 field goals. Total, LeBron had 15 points and Davis had 9. LeBron played a full 29 minutes and Anthony Davis 22. But at the end of the day, when it came down to the plus-minus of that game, LeBron was negative 21, Anthony Davis negative 24. The only players on the team that were in the plus in terms of plus-minus that day against the Celtics were Dwight Howard with plus 3, who played a full 18 minutes. And that was it. Everyone else was in the minus. And when your superstars aren't performing, it is very hard to win. And that's something that LeBron and AD didn't have to worry about as much when we get to the playoffs. So then we get to a loss to Philly. Again, another decent team, not great. They lost in the first round of the playoffs again this year. And then we lose to Portland, and that's where that specific loss started to worry me, because the Lakers, they just looked slow that game. Portland is a fairly fast team, and the Lakers, being a very defensive team, which I'll get into in the next segment, they really just weren't ready for that game. Portland forced the Lakers to play their game rather than Portland playing the Lakers game. And that's not how the Lakers team operates, and that's partially what led to their postseason success, and the games they lost contributed to it also. So then, starting on March 1st, the Lakers entered a new area of their schedule, you could say, and it was really going to be their final test before the hiatus, which, no one could have predicted. But on March 1st, they play New Orleans. There's a picture of LeBron standing next to Zion, and they compared it to Michael Jordan and Kobe, I think. It was at the free throw line. It was a good picture. And then on March 3rd, they play the Sixers. They win this time, 120-107. So now they've won both of the games in the start of this test, really. And then on Friday, March 6th, then they play against the Bucks. And this was a big weekend for the Lakers. Friday against the Bucks, Sunday against the Clippers. And the Clippers, who the Lakers had struggled against all year. And they wound up beating Milwaukee by a score of 113-103. So now they're on a 3-game winning streak. They beat arguably the best team at the time in the league. Now they're playing against the Clippers. Now, granted, they were technically the away team, but in Staples Center, almost all the fans, no matter what, are Lakers fans. So, it was fair to say that they had an extra home game here. But that didn't matter in any of the other games before. They were, this point in the season, they were 49-13. So they still had a good record, but the Clippers were still a hump that they had to get over. And they beat the Clippers 112-103. Kawhi looked exhausted in that game. And in that game, LeBron James had 28 points. Anthony Davis had 30 points. Avery Bradley had 24 points. Now, an interesting thing about that game is Danny Green had 0, though, against the Clippers. And we'll kind of see that later when they play in the bubble. Danny Green had 3 field goal attempts, 2 of which were from 3-point, and missed all. And when it came down to the playoffs, he was someone that they really relied on more so on the defensive end than the offensive end, kind of because they had to. But then we kind of start to see this inconsistency from him. In that game, though, he still had 4 rebounds, 2 steals and a block, and only 1 turnover. And that's where we start to see this defensive side of this Lakers team besides Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Again, we'll get into that in the next segment. So then we continue on to play the Brooklyn Nets. Again, not as much of a test, but the Lakers lose by 2 points. That game was kind of like a release of everything that they had worked at in the last 2 games against the Bucks and Clippers. And in this game, Anthony Davis has 26 points, LeBron 29, Bradley with 10. Danny Green made a couple shots this time. He finished with 6 points, both of them from 3-point. And so the Nets game, it wasn't really a big deal in terms of the overall outcome of the season for the Lakers. They, again, one of those inexcusable losses, but they were still riding high after their previous 2 wins. So then the season gets called off. We have to wait all the way until July 30th before the Lakers play their next regular season game, where they beat the Clippers by 2 points, 103-101. And this game was okay, they won, but the Lakers did not look good. For that matter, neither did the Clippers. But Paul George finished with 30 points, so not too shabby, but he had a plus-minus of 0. Now, plus-minus isn't everything, but still compared to the other starters on the Clippers that day. Reggie Jackson finished +9 with 10 points. Kawhi Leonard +16 with 28 points. And Marcus Morris, who's Markieff Morris's brother, finished +10, however, with 0 points. And so the Clippers didn't have a great game. But then you come over to the Lakers, and Anthony Davis and LeBron James each played 35 and 34 minutes each. But their field goal percentages, AD was 42%. LeBron was 31% that game. It was bad. Anthony Davis went to the free throw line 17 times and made 16 of them. He actually had a good game, though. 34 points, while LeBron had 16. And the interesting thing about this game right here is that LeBron and AD, they both finished in the minus. AD -3, LeBron James -4 in the overall plus-minus, compared to KCP +16. And Kyle Kuzma +12, Alex Caruso +9, Dion Waiters, who they had just signed, +17, Dwight Howard +5. And granted, there were some other minuses in there, but they were still able to be less reliant on AD and LeBron James. And that was one of the reasons why they won in the end. So then they continue on in the bubble. They lose a few games. They lose to the Raptors, they lose to OKC, they lose to the Rockets, they lose to the Pacers again, and they lose to the Sacramento Kings. It was not looking good for them. And they finished off the season with a record of 52-19, which is bad in no ways. But in the bubble, they had 2 wins and 5 losses. And that's not good. So then they start the playoffs in the first round against Portland. They lose game 1. The Lakers really were not back into their groove, and it was a bad game. They didn't play well. And then they finish off the rest of this series with 4 straight wins. And they're like, all right, we got this now. They're finally playing well again. And then in the second round, playing Houston, again they lose the first game. And you start to wonder again, is this a problem? Like, I don't think this reflects onto the players as much, but I think this reflects onto Frank Vogel. He wasn't as prepared for these playoff matchups as he should have been. With Portland, you know they're a very fast team. You know Damian Lillard is going to hit threes from the logo, basically. And they weren't ready for it. Their defense wasn't ready to guard him on night 1 from all around the court. And then Houston with James Harden and Russell Westbrook and everyone else on the team. Again, they kind of challenged the Lakers, but it wasn't that big of a problem because there they had a fairly more comparable matchup. Yet still, the Lakers won. Their matchups were better either way. You know, James Harden's defense allowed the Lakers to really operate a more fluid offense, you could say, allowing them to get more passes off and stuff and be able to drive to the middle. And that's something that we see a lot of players on this team do, because they were not a heavy three-point team. You know, they were mostly big guys. They were a big defensive team. And so when it came down to offense, they had players that would pass the ball around, cut, and then pass it out. Someone else would drive into the middle, like LeBron James, and go in and find a way to get the ball up and score. For Anthony Davis, you know, he'd post someone up. He'd get the pass, turn around, fade away, or go in and shoot, make a move. But someone else on the Lakers offense that could just go into the middle off a pass from the top of the key would be Alex Caruso. He'd get a pass, he'd just drive right in, and he really was a standout player this year. He really showed how good he is. So then we move on to the Western Conference Finals, where they play the Denver Nuggets, and they wind up beating the Nuggets in 5. It wasn't that great of a series. It wasn't as fun of games. The scores being 126 to 114, 105 to 103. The Lakers winning both of those games, and then dropping Game 3, 106 to 114. Then finishing off the series with 2 more wins, 114 to 108 and 117 to 107. Denver just wasn't putting up as much of a challenge as some of the other teams did. And as well, the Clippers were not there. They lost to Denver, and I think the Clippers would have been a much more difficult matchup for the Lakers. So then we move on to the finals, starting on September 30th against Miami. And something interesting about these playoffs is they only had 1 off day between each game, pretty much throughout. The Lakers finished their series fairly quickly, the first 3 being 5 games each, and so they did get a little more time in between series, but overall they the games were fairly close to each other without travel days. And for the Lakers, it probably hurts them for that because they are a bigger team. They do need more rest. They do have LeBron James, who's 35 years old. And being able to finish those series off quickly and getting some extra rest between games was crucial. The last game in the Portland series was on August 29th, and then the first game of the Houston series, September 4th. So they had a lot of time in between. They had 6 days. And so all that contributed to helping them. They had another 6 days between the Houston series and the Denver series. Although then they only had 4 days between the Western Conference Finals and the overall finals. But having all that extra time in between each series really let the Lakers regenerate, really. So then on Wednesday, September 30th, we continue on with the finals, and they beat the Heat by 18 points. They really made the Heat look bad. Continue on to Game 2. They beat them 124-114. The Heat kind of picking up their offense a little bit that game. Then they lose Game 3 by 11 points, 104-115. And LeBron had a quote after that game, like, I don't want to go if we can't lose this game. If it's tied 2-2, like, we don't like that. Like, they want to stay up. So then, moving on to Game 4, which they win closely, only by 6 points. And then on to Game 5, which many people thought that was going to seal the deal for them, win the NBA Finals. But no, Danny Green misses a shot with 8 seconds left or whatever, and he got death threats for that. It was a rough time to be Danny Green, but overall, didn't really matter. They come back the next game, win 106-93, and granted, the real score would have been like 106-80, but at the end of the game, the Lakers, for like the last 2 minutes, took out LeBron and AD and all the starters, and they finished the game off really on a low note, but Miami hit a few threes in that time, so it wasn't a big deal at all, but Miami ends up losing either way, 106-93. The series is over, and the Lakers win. The Lakers did have some injuries throughout that. Anthony Davis was hurt for a while, had a series of problems, elbow, heel, his tailbone at one point, I think. And so he missed 20 games over the course of the season. LeBron had his groin problems as well as a few others and wound up missing 15 games. So they only had 4 that they missed that overlapped. And in that time, the Lakers went 2-2. And neither of those injuries were that serious. I mean, you still look at the Lakers' regular season record, and some of those inexcusable losses, they lost because either LeBron or AD was not playing. But still, we saw that when neither of them were playing, they still went 2-2. They were fine. So that was kind of a summary of the entire season for them and kind of what led up to it. So now quickly, I'm going to go over sort of their style of play. So over the last few years, the league has become more and more reliant on three-pointers. It's really a math game. When you take shots and make shots that are worth 50% more, you're going to win the game because you just got more points. And that's something that the Lakers didn't really have this year, and they really relied on their defense to shut that down on the other team and kind of make it equal and force the other team to play the Lakers game where they could play kind of and force the other team to make shots on the inside and then have AD pop out of nowhere and block But the Lakers are filled with shooters such as Danny Green, KCP, Avery Bradley. You can even also add in there LeBron, AD made some threes throughout the season. Even Kyle Kuzma and Alex Caruso and Markieff Morris and as okay, but none of their shooters pop out really, except for Danny Green, who obviously had a rough time in the bubble and in Game 5 of the finals. But that was okay for them. They were able to play games in the paint. They were able to score on the inside. And a lot of that ability was due to their defense. And most people think of the Lakers' defense with AD, which is true, but Avery Bradley, KCP, Alex Caruso, Danny Green, Dwight Howard, LeBron James, Kyle Kuzma, Markieff Morrison, Rajon Rondo, and even JaVale McGee. They're all good defensively. There are no James Hardens in there that are just going to let you drive by them. And basically, those players were able to keep the shooters in check for most of the game and would force them to play the Lakers game, force them to come inside, force them to make shots in the paint, force them to go to the free throw line. And that made the game equal. It made the shots that the Lakers were taking and the shots that their opponents were taking equal, both worth 2 points with the exception of free throws. And obviously it's not like they never took a three-pointer, but compared to the other teams in the league, they were much less reliant on three-pointers. And yes, some players like Dwight goes crazy sometimes, like in the finals and in the playoffs in general. They kind of needed him to aggravate some of the other players on the other teams, but that's just all part of it. Dwight Howard is there to make people angry and stuff. And so then there's the coaching. So before the season, the Lakers were looking for a coach, and Coach Frank Vogel was not at the top of their list of who they were planning on hiring, but he was on the list, wound up being hired, and wound up being the perfect coach for this team. He said it himself. He wasn't the first pick for the job, but he was the best pick. He kept the players together. He was good with LeBron and AD. And for any coach that isn't as good of a coach, you would want to put them with good players, and that's what he got put with. He was put with LeBron and AD. And his coaching staff as well, the rest of it, they all helped contribute to it. Their defense at the end of the game was superb, and it really propelled them and made them unique compared to the Raptors or the Warriors. And so now we'll talk about their uniqueness and compared to the other teams of the past few years. And the Lakers' theme this year was Leave a Legacy. Obviously, that was inspired by the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant in January, and how the Black Mamba, he was inspiring to pretty much everyone. Almost every player, almost everyone, has something they can say about Kobe Bryant. Obviously, him being a Laker for his entire career has 2 numbers retired after him in Staples Center in LA. And the Lakers, they designed a new jersey. The Black Mamba jersey was black. It was different. I thought it was pretty cool. It had a 2 and a heart for his daughter Gianna Bryant, who wore number 2 when she played basketball. And overall, that season was really for him. And this meant a lot for the players of the Lakers. Anthony Davis, who became friends with Kobe on the 2012 Olympics team, and LeBron, who over the past year or two, plus playing against him for so long, since LeBron was a rookie, and since And that was when Kobe was in his prime. That's when Kobe won some championships. And it took LeBron until he went to the Heat in the early 2010s to win a championship. And they had a very high mutual respect for each other. And it was just a few days before Kobe died that LeBron passed one of Kobe's spots on an all-time list. And, Kobe was full supportive of LeBron. One of his last Instagram posts was him congratulating LeBron. And he really meant a lot to LA and to everyone, not just the Lakers even. But it was definitely well-fitting that the Lakers won this year. And people were rooting for the Lakers partially because of that before the NBA hiatus from March to July. But then over that time, I think a lot of that was lost, and by the time they picked it up, the Lakers were often thought of as kind of the evil team here, even though they really weren't. And I mean, yes, they were the favorites, but they weren't a mean team. And after not playing for so long, I think a lot of that narrative of winning this for Kobe and all of that, it kind of got lost. And last but not least about Kobe, the Mamba mentality. First one in the gym, last one out. He really shed that off on a lot of these players, even though they weren't necessarily teammates with him. But that's another thing. He was kind of an unofficial coach/mentor to them, and definitely contributed in a large way to their winning. And so now on to the last topic of this episode. Since the finals ended on Sunday night, several people have come out and said that now they think that LeBron is better than Michael Jordan. I always thought that, because Michael Jordan, he wasn't fully committed at the beginning when he went to play baseball, but he ended up coming back. But either way, he didn't have the longevity that LeBron James has. It's been 8 years, or maybe 7 or 8 years since it's been more than half a decade, almost a full decade since he won his first championship for 3 different teams, 3 different organizations, 3 different coaches, and with several different teammates. He built really a powerhouse in Miami around him with Chris Bosh and D. Wade, and then comes back to Cleveland where he has Kyrie Irving, and then comes over to the Lakers and gets put with Anthony Davis. Being able to perform in so many different situations is why I think he's the GOAT, and that's why so many other people recently have been calling him the GOAT. The greatest of all time. And on that note, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Substantiate Podcast. This was a different episode than we usually have, but I definitely think that it was well worth it to be able to talk about the champions of the NBA, the Los Angeles Lakers. And I haven't decided yet if I will do this for every sports winner, especially if either the Astros or the Rays win the MLB this season. It's going to be very hard to talk about them because I'm a Yankees fan. But we'll see what happens, and we'll have more episodes coming every Wednesday, every week. And again, you can follow us on social media at substantiatepod, our website www.substantiatepod.com, and share the Substantiate podcast with anyone who you think would like it, and repost it on Instagram. Tag us, and we will repost it on our story. If you want to contact this podcast, the best way to do that is to send us a DM over social media, or to send us an email to substantiatepod@gmail.com. thank you for listening to this episode of Substantiate. The best way to help support the show is to, number one, tell your friends about Substantiate. That is the number one way to support us. The second way is to leave us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. Number 3, follow us at substantiatepod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.